all dirty. Sadly, we just cleaned this all off too. It gets dirty really quick. So I'm standing in between our two CO2 collection systems where we process all the CO2 generated by fermentation. Between these two systems that we put in between 1998 and present, we save over 1 million pounds of CO2 that we would have had to purchase from outside sources. That's all made in-house and goes right back into our beer. And because of these two systems, we haven't had to buy CO2 in 17 years. So in early days of the 1990s, we were venting off CO2 from our fermenters, and we turn around and buy CO2 from Seattle. The CO2 that we got from Seattle take about 3 weeks to get here. At the same time, we were venting off all this CO2 that we could save in-house. So in 1998, we decided to put in a CO2 collection system. So the system over here was our first one to go in 1998. When we put it in, we were the first craft brewery in the country that had ever put one in of our size. Later in 2001, as our operations got bigger, we put in a second system because we were making more CO2 and needed that extra capacity. So in the years we've had this, we've saved over about 1.2 million pounds of CO2 per year that we're not buying from an outside source. CO2 is a greenhouse gas. So when you're buying CO2 that's made by a manufacturer, it's coming from burning fossil fuels or from CO2 wells. By producing our own CO2, we're taking the CO2 that was captured in the malt when it was grown, and the yeast is releasing that. We're capturing it, putting it right back in the beer. So we're making that greenhouse gas a circular product, but it was natural to begin with. It didn't come from the ground like fossil fuels do. So during the fermentation process, as the yeast is producing all this CO2, you have to vent that out of the tank because it creates a lot of pressure. We're collecting that CO2 through a system of pipes that comes into this system. The CO2 is clean, and what we do is we scrub the CO2 with water. So we have a tower here that rinses out any of the beer particulates, any of the hops, anything that might have passed through into the CO2. You want to get that cleaned out so it doesn't smell like the beer that was coming from. So it'll get scrubbed in the water, and then it goes through a little compressor that compresses the CO2 up to a higher pressure. This is so we can turn it into a liquid later for storage. So the compressor is running, and then next we go down to a carbon tower, and the carbon's going to remove any odor. So even though we scrubbed it with water, it's removed a lot of the hops and beer particles. If you smell the CO2 at this point, it still smells like the beer it came out of. It's going to have hop aromas and smell like malt, everything else. The carbon removes that, so now it's clean, pure CO2. We run it through a desiccant, which the desiccant's just removing all the moisture because we've had all this water on it and everything. And then from there, it's going to go out to a tank outside, and we have a big bulk tank outside. You basically turn the CO2 into liquid. Now it's stored and ready for reuse. When we're ready to reuse the CO2, we bring it back into the building. We warm it up because it's really cold at that point, and then it goes off to our brewing process, carbonation, purging our bottles and cans so the beer gets to you as fresh as it can.